But why? Why Tribe?
With startups, it's about people.
This whole notion that you can run a scrappy startup is out the window.
If you don't have a well-run company from the get-go, it's just very difficult to scale. What problem are you trying to solve? From a wealth perspective is really interesting. I think you're doing the right thing.
It's not a joke to launch a regulated digital asset business.
Patience is the name of the game as well, or sure, right? Don't expect money coming in tomorrow.
Prediction on the road ahead. What would be your 2 cents? Welcome back to Block by Block. Today and this week is a very special day and week. It's a special week because finally Tribe has obtained its full broker-dealer license from Vivara. So we're celebrating. Please celebrate with us. And because we have a very special guest with us today that I've been looking forward for a month or more, really, to be able to sit down and have a conversation with. It is Zainab, or non-executive director on the Tribe board. So welcome. Thank you for coming on the podcast with us.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing. So part of building a regulated company is obviously quite strict governance. It is running an adult company really from day one, quite frankly, right? This whole notion that you can run a scrappy startup is out the window. It's not a thing when you're building under VAR or, quite frankly, any other regulator, right? A lot of people that are venture builders may look at this and think, why are you establishing a board so early? Haven't even operationalized yet, etc., etc. So for us, that was a necessity, right? You and I met very serendipitously through effectively a common acquaintance, right? I was having a meeting with this person. I think you had a meeting after.
That's right.
This.
That's right.
We're sipping coffee basically, and I recall you asking, oh, what do you do with your life or something along those lines?
Yeah.
And we ended up having probably like a 30-40 minute conversation about real estate tokenization, etc., the wider ecosystem that Tribe is building in. And from there on, the sort of relationship started building. And it's been an absolute pleasure, to be honest. And we were so grateful when you were willing to accept this capacity and to work with us. So before we launch into the wider conversation about the board, what it means to be a non-executive director, your career, and so on and so forth, I wanted to go back a little bit earlier, right? You're now part of our tribe, right? Yes. The tribe that is the internal tribe.
You're part of mine.
Amazing. I'm glad. You have a very dynamic experience and background, and I want to talk a little bit about that first, right? If you think about the stuff that's not on the CV, the stuff that's not on the LinkedIn, right? Where you come from, that whole background,
sure.
That foundational piece that shaped who we are. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so my personal background, ethnicity-wise, is I'm Iraqi originally. I was born there, lived there for about 9 years, up until the Gulf War, and then moved around a little bit and eventually settled in the UK. So I suppose I traverse this sort of cross-cultural sort of tapestry relatively well, given that I spent the formative years in an Arabic-speaking country with that sort of cultural nuances that go with that, and then came to a Western country. And so I guess, that was definitely an experience that shaped, I think, who I am, having sort of lived through a war and then a little bit of displacement and then eventually settling in the UK. And really, as a child, age 11, being able to integrate relatively well. So I was relatively lucky that I moved to the UK the age that I did, versus being a little bit older, perhaps. And so I think that gave me, I'd like to think, personality-wise, gave me some resilience and some grit early on, and allowed me to, I guess, read the room maybe a little bit better than maybe other people that didn't have that experience, because I had to integrate, I had to assimilate culturally relatively early. So maybe that's just a little bit about sort of who I am. And I think part of the reason that I've had the career that I've had is because I love people. I love spending time with people, and I love to get to know what makes them tick and who they are, and able to, I guess, read between the lines. And that's what excites me most, actually, with everything that I've done. That's kind of the thread, I suppose, that it's just people and getting to know people and building relationships.
That's super interesting. Obviously, there's a in a way perhaps a challenging start to have to change the environment completely, figure out a whole new set of sociocultural rules, etc., etc. When you look at, I guess, the professional journey that you have been on, and then you layer that with the fact that you're a parent of multiple children, motivation, ambition, and drive, it is obvious that there's lots of it there, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that this like non-linear background, if you will, of growing up and changing cultures and so on, is part of the fact that you were so successful and ambitious, or is that maybe from the Iraqi culture? Or where does it come from, right? Like,
I think definitely the immigrant girl experience is definitely a thing. And I think there's sort of so many subtle pressures, I guess, that shape you and make you who you are. I think the parents that I was very lucky to have very academic parents. So they're both university professors who valued education, who valued ambition. And I would say that they were sort of the epitome as sort of early role models of a growth mindset. So they, even though they had, hardships, obviously coming into a new country and starting from scratch, they just didn't see anything as a challenge. They just got on with it, right? And part of it maybe was survival. Now that I'm a parent, I kind of appreciate that. It's sort of, and what they had to go through. But I think a lot of it, especially my mother, I would say, is a great example of somebody who's just like, yeah, I'm a biology professor, but I can do real estate. I can find my own internet company.
Cool.
I can be an editor of a health magazine. She's done all this sort of portfolio careers when portfolio career wasn't a thing, back in the 90s and early 2000s. So I think a lot of that role model has definitely shaped me. And as you become a parent as well, you kind of want to go, well, that's kind of a big responsibility. Like, this is not just about me anymore. I've got to actually be an example to the next generation. And what does that look like? And just kind of, personalize it, I suppose, and say, okay, there are pressures. It is hard to balance everything. You can't have it all at the same time. But you try your best. And as long as you show up and you be authentic and you have integrity, then that's what it's about.
I think if I recall correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you're Warwick grad, right?
Warwick, yes.
Yeah. I'm thinking about sort of my own journey, right? When I was late teens, going into sort of pre-university years, I wanted to be a fighter pilot for the Swedish Army, right? And I went on that journey to get there for many, many years, right? Training and doing all the sort of pre-military services, etc. And today I'm building a digital asset business, which is, you literally couldn't be further apart, right? In hindsight, I'm kind of glad I didn't end up going down that route, because it's a very specific kind of life to serve for the army and fly jet fighters. But the sort of the 18-year-old version of you, did she wanted to be, a senior executive at Invesco, right? Like, what was the dream back then, and how did that change through studies and life and whatnot?
I actually wanted to be an activist at 18.
Still can.
Yeah, still can.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to come onto that actually, because I always had this sort of humanitarian streak to me. Obviously, again, the kind of the migration, the refugee experience shaped that. But I was doing volunteerships at sort of against the arms trade sort of organizations. In my university years, in the summers, I was raising money for charity as a job. And so I did a lot of that. And then the more I sort of experienced the NGO world or the charity world, I think I came to realize that actually it would be good to do something at a public policy level or a higher level when I've got a lot more experience in the real world and kind of maybe in financial services, where the real decisions, where the real centers of power are being made. And I decided to take that route, and a lot of that was parental pressure to go, no, you're not joining a charity after the investment that we've made. But I'm glad they sort of steered me in that direction.
Yeah.
And some of it was sort of around financial security and going into finance. That was another element of it. But actually that fire around that space is still there. And that's why, yes, joint asset management, which I guess on the face of it doesn't look like a very, I suppose, a very useful part of society, but it actually is. Because if you think about asset management, if you think about especially active allocators and where they're allocating capital to sectors of the economy of the future, that's really their central job. And I believe I'm a capitalist still at heart, and I believe in the role of enterprise and trade and private sector in helping drive growth and in kind of a trickle-down effect of many of these companies to the wider sectors of the society. And unfortunately, we're experiencing a world where there is much wider inequality between nations and in nations, but I still believe in the power of the private sector to do well and to, and I guess that's part of the reason I was interested in Tribe and kind of that democratization aspect and access of wealth.
We'll get on to democratization in a bit. I'd love to kind of unpick. There's a lot to unpick there.
Yeah.
When you look at, so this is very naturally segues us from, parental guidance into the world that you entered into professionally, if you will, which I'd love to have a conversation about another day, because at some point I will be a parent as well. And how much should you steer versus how laissez-faire should you be? Very interesting parenting styles.
I'm still figuring it.
Yeah, I got it. But you spent a long time in large asset managers, Fidelity, Invesco. For many years had led Invesco in the MENA region. Enormous company, right? I think today something like $2.5 trillion AUM or something absolutely ridiculous, right? Like numbers that you can't really wrap your head around. As an outsider that haven't gone through that journey, that haven't sat at the tables, had the conversations, and understood day-to-day realities, what does that mean? Help us understand, what does it actually mean to work in and represent a company like Invesco that isn't obvious on the externals, on the surface of things, if you will?
That's a good question. I think obviously my client base was also some of the most sophisticated institutional investors in the world. So looking at sovereign wealth funds of this region, central banks, large pension funds, family offices, endowments, and so on. So who I was interfacing with as well were extremely sophisticated sort of professionals really at the center of global capital. And they really helped finance, especially lately over the last 10 years, helped finance much of the world's projects and investments. And so it was a very interesting time in that I was having some very integral conversations as the world transitions into a new global order. Not to be too grand about it, but there were certainly sort of CIOs and very senior professionals that I was liaising with, that we were informing about sort of our house view, certainly from different investment teams and different investment centers, and kind of the challenges that they were facing as well. So I think that was probably the most interesting part of the job, the kind of intellectual stimulation that I was getting, and also how we were able to be helpful. I think that was, for me, being of service is sort of something that drives me. And I think if I put myself in that shoe, yes, I was sort of helping drive sales as well for Invesco. But I really also wanted to be as helpful as I could, informing them of, what other institutional investors, for example, around the world were saying. Did they resonate with the same challenges and opportunities? And maybe that was kind of the crux of that role.
You said something that I want to unpick a little bit, sort of challenges and opportunities, right? When you're at that scale, whether that's, in our world, real estate developers, asset managers, whatever they are, they move with a very different speed than a early stage digital asset player like Tribe does, and obviously all the other companies in our ecosystem. But it is inevitable that all of them will have to get involved in digital assets, right? And it's already happening, perhaps not to a huge scale in the MENA region yet, but certainly if you look at other jurisdictions, even banks that are effectively now starting to hoover up players to be able to invest into and custody these assets and so on and so forth. So from sitting now together with us on the other side of the table, would love to, hear your thoughts on how does one go from being what Tribe is today, right? Which is really a 14-month-old company, give or take, that just got its license. Yay.
Yeah.
To being able to be a counterparty to some of these large-scale institutional players
Yes.
as the gateway into digital assets, right? Because they're not going to figure it out by themselves, right? Neither will we. It's going to have to be a collaborative effort. So how does one, in your view, having been now on both sides of the table, actually navigate that process?
Look, it's such an interesting time to be where you are as well, because it's such an evolving asset class. I think there's still a lot of education that needs to happen around it. Yes, there's a lot of capital that has flowed into it, certainly on the retail side, but I think institutionally, there's a little bit of caution, say around digital currencies mostly, but the kind of the infrastructure and the piping, I suppose, around various other access points remain to be figured out. And I think that's where Tribe comes in as well, right?
So the problem solver in the middle of all of it.
Right, exactly. And I think large institutional investors, let's take an example of sovereign wealth fund, right? There's different objectives of different sovereign wealth funds, but the primary one of a traditional sovereign wealth fund is to be a saving vehicle for future generations, especially in this region as the oil runs out. So they've got to have an asset allocation that is relatively cautious, that is able to sort of have a set target return that will see them through as the oil, as demand for oil or the supply of oil declines. And so if you look at sort of pure economic theory or pure asset allocation models that are more traditional, they've still got to allocate to kind of more traditional and plain vanilla asset classes. There is much more of a demand now to look at these new asset classes, but I think they'll probably remain at the fringe for a little bit longer just because the liquidity, the depth of market isn't there. But at some point, that's going to change. And at some point, as you say, from a custody perspective, that's going to become a lot easier. But I think to answer your point more directly around what it takes for Tribe to eventually say I see it over the next 5 to 10 years, to be honest, to access those larger institutional investors is governance. So I think you're doing the right thing.
By right person on that side.
Thank you. But really to put a board together and to put proper institutional style or institutional level governance that is world standard. That is extremely important. Because if you don't have a well-run company from the get-go, if you don't have systems and processes from the get-go, it's just very difficult to scale, as you know. And I think, again, because it's an evolving asset class, you're going to have to hold hands with a lot of these larger investors, and it's a lot about education. And what is it? Don't expect a mandate tomorrow. Don't expect money coming in tomorrow. But it's really about being on that journey with them. Education, knowledge transfer, being at the crux and heart of that journey with them is really what's going to place you in very good stead later on, versus the others that are going to come in once the asset class is established and it's all pretty well, and they expect sort of checks.
Fair. It's very interesting you said the education, because we find ourselves a lot having the conversation that digital assets or virtual assets, depending on what part of the world you're in, it's called interchangeably both, right? It has both effectively net new asset classes, but in our instance, it's not really a net new asset class. It's a different settlement mechanism and then a different way of custody and holding it legally. Whereas a lot of the time, the counterparty still looks at it as, but this is something new that we need. No, that's not what it is. It's not a new product. It's real estate. It's the underlying property or asset isn't necessarily going to change the way that we settle the transactions and the way that we custody and so on. That's what's changing. I think not only Tribe, but as an ecosystem, we have a lot of work to do in educating and separating the understanding of we call real world assets that we're just changing the infrastructure around and the fiat backed crypto stables, etc., which are net new products that didn't exist 15 years ago at all. And obviously then the convergence of those two, and then layering that with the banking and TradFi system and so on and so forth. So I agree, 5 to 10 years, absolutely. It'll take some time. But that's what we're here for.
Well, I mean, the patience is the name of the game as well.
For sure.
Right? You have to have the kind of patience and this is patient capital. This is money that is reserved for the long term. And so you've got to be, obviously the access points for retail investors may come first, but eventually the way you really scale is through large institutional investors that you're solving a problem. I think that's the key. What problem are you trying to solve? Because maybe a challenge could be, well, how is, real estate tokenization different than a REIT, for example, a real estate investment trust? Why is that? What are you changing? What is innovation there? And I think that's where you have to kind of come at it from a very different perspective of integration into a completely different asset class of real world assets and token and sort of everything that goes along with that.
I'll look forward to tackling that. Some years ago, I think early 2023, something like that, you stepped away from the corporate, that version, that part of the corporate career. It's I can imagine a big decision given your the scope of responsibility, the title you carried, and obviously we already spoke about who they were. Why would one do that?
It was a mutual decision, to be honest, at the time. Decided to kind of end that part of my tenure with Invesco, but I also was a little bit burnt out. So I wanted to, because I was traveling all the time on a plane every week, twice a week.
Wow.
I had small babies, and I sort of figured maybe this is a time to take a career break. Maybe this is sort of, kind of kismet to do something. It turned out I'm not wired that way. I don't really do career breaks.
I've seen your LinkedIn profile. You've stacked a few things since then. So
I did it for a month or two. And then I thought, no, I can't just, what am I doing? And I think because I'm still relatively young, sort of in my 40s. And
not relatively, very young.
Thank you.
Correction.
Well done, tick. I still feel like I've got a lot to give and a lot to do. And not to take away from kind of full-time moms, because that's an extremely important job. And it was really nice to be able to spend a lot of time with my kids. And I had another one in the last 3 years. So that definitely kept me busy. But there was still something in me that maybe is FOMO. Maybe Dubai does that to you, or the UAE does that to you, where you feel like there's so much going on. It's such a dynamic and interesting market. I can't just be at home. I need some intellectual stimulation. So I got really interested in fintech, actually, because asset management is a very traditional part of finance. It's TradFi, as the kids call it. And
hey, I'm trying to bring you into the kids category.
Thank you. I'm trying.
Yeah.
And so I thought, what is this fintech thing all about? Like, I need to learn about it. So I did a course at Harvard to just gain a bit of knowledge, and then ended up co-founding 2 fintechs of my own. One in the kind of remittance space, which didn't quite work out, and then another one in my native Iraq, where I co-founded a digital bank, and
pretty incredible.
Which is a very, very fun journey. I exited that about a year ago, but it was an incredible experience and learned a lot. And then kind of again wanted to be part of the ecosystem of fintechs, and so again joining the board of Tribe and one other, and INED for another wealth tech platform. And on the advisory board of another travel card fintech as well. So kind of been really enjoyed being part of that ecosystem and learning a little bit about it, but also having a foot still in asset management, where I'm part of a network where I matchmake on deals between senior members of the network. So it's kept me busy. I'm sort of thinking about the next chapter and where that takes me. And it's an ever-evolving space, and that's what makes it exciting.
Amazing. Oh yeah, we got that. I think if your person had that itch, it's never gonna go away.
Exactly.
Right?
I just couldn't,
like I said, intellectual stimulation.
I wish I could just relax. Sometimes I'm envious of people who just kind of chill and relax.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of relaxation. Don't get me wrong, but I think there's always something. I'm like, no, I need to get.
There's one of those, like, you have one shot at this life. On this. At least in this version, on this planet, whatever your belief may or may not be, make the most out of it, right?
I agree.
If that's what makes you happy, pursuing whatever it is in sort of board capacities or building or back into the, for sure, you have to.
But it's about learning as well, right? You can't be stagnant.
Understand.
I mean, exactly. Your journey is exemplary of that.
Yeah, learning and problem solving. It's what genuinely makes me happy.
Yeah.
It's what keeps me going when when the going gets tough, and most of the time it does in the early stages for sure.
Yeah.
It's not a joke to launch a regulated digital asset business. Again, it's a very, very challenging, for sure the most challenging company I've ever launched. So you got to have that inner fire and that itch to get you through every day.
I also did a lot of work, I guess, over the last couple of years on my values. Because again, as you approach your 40s, you kind of go, what is this all about? And what am I doing? What I'm doing? And okay, the money's good, but you're on this hamster wheel where you're just, what is it for? Like you do kind of, is only when I stop, to be honest, is where I guess I had space to ask those difficult questions. When you don't have time, you just keep going on that hamster wheel.
Yeah.
And so I did like a personal branding exercise with a very good company.
What does that mean?
So I think they looked at sort of my profile. They really dug deep into what is it that I value most? What is my purpose? I mean, a lot of these are superfluous sort of words that get thrown around a lot, but I think it's really important to address them because, again, coming back to that itch, what is it? Why are you itching?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what I came to realize is I don't want to join just another private equity firm, not to disrespect private equity firms. I think they've got an important role, but that is just extractive.
Yeah.
Especially in a market like this, where it is part of the global south. It is dynamic. It is trying to carve out a different place for it in the world. And in this kind of new multipolar world, where does it sit? And where does finance sit at the crux of that? And where do I want to be in that sort of world? And I think I came to realize that my experience in large organizations hopefully will help instruct from a governance perspective. I think that's why I got very interested in governance and did a governance course as well in Ireland. How you can shape startups, but also medium-sized and large enterprises into doing the right thing. Because you can always move fast and break things, but if you're not doing it with a moral compass or integrity, then society can go very wrong. It's not just about me, like it's about a collection of people that have those sort of values.
Yeah.
And I think that's also why I kind of directed myself towards those sectors, why I think fintech can have can be a massive force for good.
For sure.
But it needs to have the right people or not.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why it needs the right people, just at least trying to make the right decisions, with the information that you have at the time.
Makes sense. I think this is more true in blockchain, crypto, virtual digital asset than probably any other industry.
Yeah.
It has a very scarred reputation. There's been a lot of various initiatives, projects, companies, etc., that have gone out and consciously tried to, quite frankly, rip people off. And not at small scale either, right? And not one-offs. It's really, really massive amount of capital have just been, quite frankly, stolen in many instances straight away from both institutions, but certainly from retail investors. I do think that brand, if you will, is improving a lot. It's maturing as an industry, but it's still, I think it still sits there underneath the surface, and it's still something we have to bring into that conversation, the education that we were talking about earlier, on the more so, I would say, on the asset side, so the supply side, because they have probably less technical understanding of what we do. The capital deployment side have invested in digital assets for some time now. They're starting to understand it's just a different rail, etc., as opposed to like the Swift banking system or whatever. Which kind of very, very naturally brings us to this. You figured out what the moral compass is and who you want to be and so on and so forth.
Figuring it out.
I guess it's like a never-ending thing.
It's a journey.
Right? And you bring, like we have repeatedly spoken about for the last 30-40 minutes now, a very unique background, a professional experience and journey that is quite frankly worth a lot, right? there's literally, I can't think of a single other person in this country, in this region, that have the exact same experiences you do, right? Certainly not one that is a mother of multiple chair females and so forth. You could have picked probably many, if not any, early stage fintech, digital asset business to invest your time into, right? And we're eternally grateful that you picked Tribe. But why? Why Tribe?
First and foremost, coming back to what I said earlier, it's people. I really enjoyed our initial conversation and your co-founders as well. And I thought, at the end of the day, with startups, it's about people. It's you don't have a track record of this stuff. Obviously, your professional journey has been impressive, but of this particular product, you don't. So you invest in people, and you invest your time in people. And I think certainly I've done the right thing there. So thank you for having me on as well. It's a real pleasure. It's a real privilege to be part of this journey with you. And I think the kind of, again, coming back to the values piece, the democratization of wealth is a really important thing for me, because back to kind of the income inequality piece, you're seeing kind of the top 1% of the world getting wealthier and wealthier. And that's because access has been blocked. They've been dominated by private banks with extortionate fees, to be fair. And I think people are, at that kind of ultra high net worth space is waking up to that, as there's a intergenerational wealth transfer that's happening. And so I think that model is ripe for disruption. It's already being disrupted, especially here in this region. And I think for me, you're going to have, and again, the beauty of digital assets and what you're building specifically at Tribe is that you're able to provide that access to a different market. And real estate has always been kind of an entry asset class, I think, for most people to invest in, generally, because it's tangible, they see it, they understand it. But there's always been this barrier because of kind of high cost entry, quite a illiquid nature where it is difficult to liquidate if you need to. So I think it's a combination of being able to penetrate a different wealth segment, at least as an entryway into investing and saving, is a really, really important thing, because there's swaths and swaths of the population that have no savings or no investments at all. Right. And that's a really dangerous thing generally for society. If you look at kind of in 20 years' time, where so many have no pension to speak of. So what's going to happen in an aging society? Healthcare gets terrifying. What happens? Who's going to finance that? And the birth rate is dropping in most countries now. So it's and then climate change and all these problems I don't want to speak.
No, we didn't on the podcast.
Sorry, to be too doomsday, but they are real problems that our generation, our people in these seats need to figure out, right? We can't just pass the buck to our kids. And so I do feel like wealth and investing is at the heart of that, and being able to solve for that problem through digital assets, through access, at least in the real estate space, from a wealth perspective, is really interesting. And if you look at it from an institutional perspective, that's also an interesting, because they are able to provide the scale and the capital to really build this asset class more tangibly, and for it to become more of a long-standing pillar of most people's portfolios.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, both in terms of how do we, as I suppose, an external narrative approach and communicate. What does democratization of wealth really mean? But in reality, in practice, from us, and that filters down into the products that we build, the way we structure them, who gets access and how and why, and is it realistic? It's one thing to do it on paper, and then actually putting it out there and building something that truly benefits all of the stakeholders that are participating in whatever the product is, right? Whether it's on the asset owner seller side, or the investors, or Tribe and our stakeholders, and so on and so forth. And one concept that I feel quite confident that we have gotten right is this notion of downwards enablement, which effectively, in my view, means that to unlock true, improved wealth creation, I suppose, at the lower socioeconomic and middle socioeconomic layers, we need participation from the top.
Yep.
Right? Because even today, if I was to buy, and because we're obviously a real estate focused company, if I was to buy real estate in most places in the world, certainly in a place like Dubai, the entry barrier is quite high, right? Secondly, price accessibility is really only one aspect of the equation, right?
Right.
If I think about, there might be a fantastic investment opportunity in, I don't know, say Kenya, right? One bed in Kenya is an incredible returning asset, but it's functionally invisible to the vast majority of people in the world, right? So we have to solve for both, right? Dubai and the UAE generally, certainly Abu Dhabi and Dubai, have solved for the functional visibility of investing into real estate here, primarily off plan, I would say. If you talk about non-resident, it's quite easy. It's almost a digitally native product, not fully, but almost, right? We work off power of attorneys and so on and so forth, but you don't necessarily have to be here. But that's limited to really off-plan residential real estate. Yes, the luxury segment also participates and is high value. But it's a very small portion of the wider real estate ecosystem globally, right? So I guess my question after a long rant here is, in your view, real estate aside, like, how do you actually make it reality? Like, how do you actually take the concept of we have to democratize wealth? What does that mean? Can you give any practical examples that you have, whether they're real today or ideas of what other companies could do?
Like I said, I think if you take a look back over the last sort of 20 years, especially after the global financial crisis, wealth management for the kind of high net worth and ultra high net worth segment has been reserved for private banks and specific institutions that have had access to specific deals and investments, primarily in private markets, I think, over the last sort of 10 years, and real world assets that have been very, very difficult to access for anybody else. And even if I look at like my private bank, for example, I sort of go, what are you offering me here? Like, a fund of hedge funds was on the menu, one private credit fund, and one real estate, sort of direct real estate fund. And I just thought, okay, maybe I'm someone that has come from the investment world, so maybe I've got a little bit more knowledge. But it just wasn't good enough. And the service proposition there is broken. And I think they're trying to salvage it, certainly the private banks, and they're trying to innovate as much as they can. But what does real democratization look like? I think for the kind of, if you think at the UAE or this region, the kind of the mass affluent space, so the space of where they've got liquid investments between, say, 100,000 dirhams to $1 million, right? That's kind of a quite a large segment, I think, of this society.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got the kind of the working class that unfortunately don't have access to that, and that's another problem that I think they face, and that society as a whole faces, because if the wealth doesn't trickle down, then you've got different challenges. But if you look at the mass affluent space, because that's really kind of the lowest hanging fruit, the most contestable market, certainly for Tribe. And again, kind of coming back to the education piece, is trying to say, okay, so real estate may be the first entryway, and maybe that's what your parents invested into, and they are encouraging you to buy your first house and your first investments in real estate. I would say that real democratization comes at a level where you understand, like, buying an ETF these days in public markets is so easy and so cheap. And there are so many trading platforms that allow you to do that in a really cost-effective way. So educating yourself about sort of understanding what a diversified portfolio looks like at your level of wealth, and how you're building it, and how you're putting money into it on a lifetime value basis is really, really important. So while I believe in real estate as an asset class, I would like to bring it back to a wider conversation about, there's the whole world out there, and traditional asset classes still have a very big role to play
For sure.
in wealth creation.
100%.
And so I would say if you're looking to invest as a first-time investor with that level of wealth, it is now extremely easy to get on a Swissquote platform, not to advertise this particular platform, but there are many, many platforms that allow you to access ETFs or passive funds at a very, very cost-effective way. And yes, it may look daunting, especially when culturally, I think many cultures haven't grown up with that investing mindset.
For sure, yeah.
Like Americans sort of probably have, because they've got very little welfare state, and so they've got their 401k pension plans that people talk about on the dinner table.
Actually, yeah.
And so kids and kids, of a certain age, kind of understand what those conversations are about, and there's a lot more financial literacy in a more mature market like that. In a market like ours and other parts of the world, even Europe, there isn't that kind of conversation. But those conversations for me also need to happen at a much younger age. And target a different segment as the market matures and as digital assets also evolve, because that is the future of a financial system.
I think that I find that very interesting, and I think there's a very strong argument to be made around financial literacy in the education system.
Yeah.
Right. We learn a lot of things through our education system, certainly pre-university, when we truly have the choice to go after what we want, right? And at least we have a degree of self-awareness as a young adult, saying, okay, here's my passion, here's what I want to do. Or my parents tell me maybe I should do that, and therefore I go in that direction. But prior to that, right, we're talking about effectively all of our formative years, more or less, 18 good solid years, where there is very little work done by, I think, generally whether it's a private or the public education system, in terms of equipping young adults to understand what it means to, in this country, taxes is not a thing on a personal level, but how do you do your taxes? What does it mean to investing? What the importance of saving, etc., etc. Tribes certainly won't be able to solve that, but I think that's a massive gap that needs to at some point be backfilled, right? Because it only has a positive knock-on effect sort of a decade or two later,
100%.
Right? So if you start now, the people that are 15, by the time they're in the 30s, they might have a different economic reality to the people in the 30s today, right?
And also to bring a different lens to it, another lens is the gender gap, right? Gender gap investing, because even at a young age, boys are conditioned to have those kind of conversations with their fathers. They're probably brought in a little bit earlier, maybe not as kids, but maybe as teenagers or above. But girls are not. And so women live longer, right? They're the ones that need to be investing and saving more than men, I would say, or at least have that kind of financial independence. And that has to start early, and that has to start. And again, there's different risk appetites between the genders, for different reasons. But there needs to be, I agree with you, there needs to be a lot more education at a younger age. And kind of a safety net almost of what invest, because it can be quite scary. Because I think when you're not in that world, I think investing, especially with what happened to people in the financial crisis, they've seen the real world impacts of investing and what you can lose. So it can be quite scary. But actually, if you think about the concept of dollar cost averaging and what that means, and smoothing out your returns over a decade, what you can grow, the numbers of what you can grow are really really impressive.
And I think this is so core. I know it's so core to us as well, right? This convergence of the world of digital assets and a blockchain and real estate are in some ways like they're colliding, right? Because the capital, that the retail capital, even the qualified investor, sort of mass affluent that sits in decentralized finance or crypto and stablecoins today, they have been used to investing into very largely very volatile, high risk, high return kind of opportunities. And now we're bringing, a tokenized version of a very significantly more stable asset class, right? Which should have a long-term investment horizon, right? So that's where we have work to do in terms of educating this DeFi crypto native audience that wants to now get exposure to stabilized yielding type tokens, really. That this is not a product that you invest into, wait 60 days or 1 week or whatever. Like, you need to hold this for a period of time for it to be meaningful. So yeah, I guess that's our job in terms of educating the audience.
But that also comes with time, right? As the asset class is proven, because you're going to have volatility data, you're going to have liquidity data over a period of time where you're able to prove that this is actually a really, I can't say safe, but I can say a more sustainable way of investing rather than that constant flipping and constant kind of trading type of mindset. That can frankly lose you a lot of money if you make the wrong calls.
For sure. I mean, a lot of people got wiped out on meme coins and whatnot. It's quite big. You touched on something. We're sort of getting towards the end here, but you touched on something I wanted to pull a little bit on, which is, I guess, the gap between the genders in terms of exposure to the topic, in terms of, I suppose, whether that's at in the home or in the education system. So Tribe has actually had the absolute privilege of interacting with a number of different individuals and or groups, female specifically. And we're going on this week on Saturday to something called, I'm gonna misquote this, Financially Savvy Women, I think. And we're doing an event and presenting with them. And so the reason for bringing that up and is really to ask a question. Do you think in country like the UAE and a city like Dubai, are we behind? Are we at the forefront globally when it comes to initiatives to educate the women on investing, being more financially savvy, or is there a lot of work to be done here?
It's a worldwide problem, right? So I can't say that any particular sort of nation stands out. Scandinavia is doing very well in terms of female financial independence generally, in terms of how the level of working women there, and the I guess the infrastructure that comes along with working women and what that necessitates as well.
Proud Swede here.
Yes, well done, well done. But I think it's a really difficult one because, like I said, it starts so young, and the conditioning and the difference and the gap starts so young. That to capture it now necessitates so much intentional education and so much intentional, sort of more deliberate targeting of women. But I feel very passionately about this space because there's so much wealth that has been created as so many women have entered the workforce. My generation, my mother's generation, right? And it's either lying in cash, doing nothing in the bank, or has gone into illiquid assets that is very difficult then to regenerate, and it has tax implications if you're investing outside this country, for example, or even in this country. So I think there is a long road ahead. There are a few finfluencers now that I credit targeting specifically females and trying to address that gap. But even if you look at sort of the top earners, like women, again, back to that intergenerational wealth transfer, where there's a lot of women now that are taking the helm of their family businesses that are incredibly wealthy in their own right, not just as a nature of divorce or inheritance, but because they're actually owners of businesses. Even the private banks are not really doing that much to address women specifically as women investors.
It's like a value proposition has been built largely around the male audience, the traditionally male audience.
Yeah, because the patriarch has additionally made all the decisions, and so you understand where it comes from because they have been traditionally the makers, right?
Doesn't make it good, but it's like
the private bankers are usually male, and so they're not that many.
I don't have a private banker, but maybe one day I will. Let's see.
Well, no, you're going to disrupt this whole space, so they won't be private bankers maybe in the future. But what I'm saying is, I think now, especially with AI, which we haven't touched on, there is really no excuse to not know what to do with your money.
Yeah, fair. I agree with that.
You literally it can give you a really solid answer.
100%.
If you give it enough detail and with the right prompt to understand what you need to do. And so But, if you don't feel comfortable with that, then this is where Tribe comes in, where you're saying, okay, maybe real estate is the entry point, but I can kind of access it with a much lower amount to dip my toe in and see how it goes.
Fair. Closing note. So we're at the beginning of the journey, obviously. Something which I ask everyone is, when you think about Tribe's journey ahead, right? We're gonna try and fortune tell a little bit. But I want you to try and fortune tell a bit. Prediction on the road ahead. 1, 2 big opportunities, 1, 2 really large obstacles. In your view, for what we're building, the space we're trying to enter and disrupt. What would be your 2 cents?
So I'm gonna provide one answer that can be both an opportunity and an obstacle.
Wow. Very politically correct. It's a future career in politics.
I don't know. I'm too direct, I think, for that. But I think, and again, we haven't really touched on it, but the regulatory environment in this country is exemplary. And I think there's such a progressive leadership around this, especially around digital assets, where you've got so many regulators now in a small country like the UAE trying to understand this space and be trying to incubate as much as they can with the education levels that we all have, right, as this asset class evolves. So I think that can be both an opportunity and a challenge. Obviously, with a regulator like VARA, where they've got professionals that understand this asset class, practitioners that have come from this space to be regulators, is a really, really interesting thing. And I don't think you've seen that anywhere around the world.
Yeah.
And I think that presents an opportunity to co-create product and to co-create this space with them. The challenge or the potential misstep is that that can be something that can hold you back.
Yeah.
For good reason, potentially, when you're trying to move too fast, they sort of hamper it. But that could potentially be, it can potentially slow you down. But that's, again, where the partnership comes in. And I think that's where you've got really great access to the regulators and being able to build that partnership with them in the sandbox. Not just here, but in Qatar as well, right? I think another opportunity is, where the dominoes will fall after this war, and where the UAE and the rest of this region sit. I'm still very bullish about this region. I thought this is a bit of a blip, and I think it shook confidence certainly in the short term. But I think there are so many incredible things about this region. Not just from a time zone or geography perspective or a foundational wealth, but in terms of what this region has to offer in being true global cities. And so I think you're going to see a lot of the wealth migration will come back, and a little bit has exited, but I think it will come back. And you're going to see it, Muslim people double down on this region. And you're going to see a lot more international investors, I think, for Tribe, not just regional or local.
Agreed. Highly resilient region.
I really believe in it. And again, that comes from kind of these state-directed economies. They're small populations, and if you're able to traverse some of these challenges maybe more nimbly than much larger populations.
For sure.
But that's, again, one of the advantages of being here.
No, 100%. No, I couldn't agree more. It definitely is a blip. Obviously, it's a painful blip for a young company. Because speed is moat, right? And I agree with your comment around regulatory enablement versus doing their job as a regulator.
Yeah.
Just to regulate and sure, we operate within the framework.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance where we don't lose the moat that is speed and suffocate, basically.
Yeah.
Really. But yeah, credit where credit is due. They've done a terrific job to date. They're at the table with us, conversing and figuring things out, and super hands-on, which is amazing, right?
Yeah. That's what you need.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you're building something that's net new.
Yeah.
Really. Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Been an absolute pleasure.
Same.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Can't wait to
Thank you.
dig into it and do some real work with you. And that's it.
Excited.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
That's all for today, folks. Tune in for the next episode with Block by Block, and have a great weekend ahead.